Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Parent, and this is Driving the Business of Science podcast. My name is Keith Parent. I am the CEO of Court Square Group. Court Square Group is a managed service firm. We manage IT infrastructure for life science companies, and, and in our we have what's called ARC. It's an audit-ready, compliant cloud. We can host any application, all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. And we've also created what we call RegDocs 365, which is a content repository for hosting any type of clinical or regulatory content. We've created what we call Life Science Launchpad, which is a starting point for most companies to be able to get off the ground and scale to the point where they can, eventually get sold or go public or do whatever they need to do. With that being said, so we deal with all the IT that happens for life science companies. We meet a lot of people along the way. And one of the reasons that I did this podcast is that I don't think people realize how much in the business side of running things there are and the different types of roles that are there. So this podcast helps to tie that in. Today we have a guest on the podcast. Her name is Natalie Rebel. Anyway, I'll have Natalie come in and talk about herself. I met Natalie at a Marcus Evans event many years ago while she was with a sponsor company, and we kept in touch over the years. And I found out, she was working on a new company, and I think it's great to hear what she's doing today and what and how it fits with our theme. So, Natalie,
Yeah,
turn
hi
it over to
Keith.
you. There you
Thanks
go.
for having me on your show, and it's nice to see you again. It's nice to have this chat. I spent my whole career, the last 35 plus years, trying to figure out, clinical trials and how they run. And through that, I spent like a decade in large pharma. I spent about 15 years in CROs and the last 10 years in small biotechs. And those last 10 years really gave me a whole different perspective on partnerships and outsourcing and vendor management, which led to the creation of my consulting company to serve like small biotechs who have to manage, select, and oversee all the different vendors they need to conduct their trials. So, just a few, I don't know quite so much about your audience, and I'm sure it's a lot of people in the business, but I was looking up some in preparation for the show. I was looking up just some articles and statistics, and I was kind of flabbergasted to know that pharma spends $80 billion annually on outsourcing. I didn't think the number was that big, to tell you, to be honest. I was pretty surprised. And in looking at all the studies, they show that despite this massive transfer of work, there are still quality failures, delays, governance gaps that remain. And the small biotechs, which I serve, seem to be the ones that bear the brunt of this dysfunction right now. And I really think that we are at an inflection point in the business where outsourcing has become so big that it's grown faster than how we understand the processes to manage it.
Well,
So,
talk to me a little bit about, when we deal with a lot of small biotechs as well, and we deal with a lot of companies that start up and they usually end up hiring people from big pharma companies. They come in and they need to have all these things going on. And it's one of the problems that I see in the industry in general is that when you come from a big company to a small company, you're used to having a lot of different things in place and things aren't there. Tell me a little bit more about even your background coming from a larger company now to a smaller company and working with these small companies. What do you see from a perspective of people, the ability for them to be able to roll up their sleeves and actually get into the work and do some of that?
yeah, I think that's a great observation. And um, I kind of equate it or have an analogy for it. It's like if you're taking, the staff from a cruise ship, like those huge cruise ships, and putting it on a very sophisticated small yacht. And, these small biotechs have spent 5, 10 years building this yacht with like special motors, solar panels, all the latest innovation. And they can only bring on like 30 people to run this yacht for them to get from point A to point B and all the intermediate stops. And then they hire somebody like a purser from a large cruise ship who had like 10 people under him and only knows how to do one very specific thing. So this person can't necessarily manage or understand, how to get the big picture and really run a tight knit, low budget cruise ship, like small yacht, that they have to, talk to the chef and talk to, you
Well,
know,
that's a great
the,
analogy because I actually talk to people about what we do when we host and manage infrastructure for companies. So I say, think about a cruise ship and think about what you see above. People buy things for what's above the waterline. We run everything that's below the waterline. So we're running the engines, we're making sure the oil gets changed, all that kind of stuff when it comes to an IT perspective. So we think the same way. And I think the cruise ship analogy is great going from that cruise ship down to the small yacht. I hadn't thought about that, but that is a great way to think about it when you think about the talent that you'd need to go from one to the other. At the smaller one, you got a lot of people, you got to roll up your sleeves and you got to really dig in and do things. And I think that even when I talked to you yesterday about your background and talking about, your over the years and how you've had lots of different roles, those roles have kind of guided you as to where you are today and what you can offer out to your customer base. I know one of the things that we talked about with your discussion around small biotechs working with CROs, you talked about five very distinct questions. Tell me a little bit about those questions because I think those were questions that I think that you live by and you want to work with people to understand what those are.
yeah. So if you think of, the small biotech person, which could be a department of one or a department of three that are running, multiple trials or running this one large trial that is the centerpiece and asset of their business, they really need to understand five things to be able to continue progressing the trial and making the right decisions. They need to understand, are we hitting our milestones? Are we getting to those interim, harbors or ports on time and with the right passengers? Are we overspending? Did the chef buy like all luxury food items for this yacht that we can't afford? Will the FDA accept this or the regulatory agencies we're working with? Are they going to accept the data for our trial? Can we tell if the CRO is performing based on the data they've given us? So I always find this one particularly interesting because we hire these CROs and or vendors to, run the trials, and they score themselves. Like they give themselves their own report cards. So they have the benefit to tell us, yeah, I have an A in everything right now, or my dashboard is completely green. But does the person who's receiving the information have the tools to actually ask the right questions, understand what they're getting, and dig into it to really say, yeah, what you're saying actually aligns with what my board and investors want? And can they use the data they're given to make go no go decisions? Because that is the biggest thing in drug develop when you're a small company, is that you either have an asset that wins or you want to kill it off as soon as possible to stop wasting money on it. So with those five questions, if we can get those 30 people that you've hired on your yacht to actually focus on answering those five questions, then you know if you're going in the right direction. You know how to, go around the storm and make a detour. You know how to get to the next port to or get to the next milestone in case of a study and talk to investors to get them to invest in your company and your product to develop it further.
That's great. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, when we talk about small companies versus very large companies, they do this over and over and over again all the time. And when you go to a
Yep.
small company, this may be their lifeblood. This is that they do it, they're doing it once, or they may only have one product, or it's the first time they're getting out of an incubator and they start up a company, they got some funding and they're trying to do this. That whole concept of getting to that go, no go decision is so important, and setting up the milestones and doing what you're doing in there is really important. Now, do you see there's a difference between you doing this for small biotechs versus when you were with a sponsor? Was there a different way of doing things? How do you think differently about that when you're working with that small company on that 30-person yacht?
Yeah, so I think of it when you're working with a small company, everything is about efficiency and clarity. Um, when you're working with a big company, you have people that are specialized in specific roles and skills that, that allow you to go into the details much more. When you're working in a small company, you have to kind of live in the 36,000 foot view and understand when it's time or when there's a signal for you to dive down and fix like a very specific problem. If you get flooded with all the details of everybody, so to go back to our analogy of the yacht, if the chef on the yacht sends you their full pantry inventory, you know, every week, you have to go through that and understand, okay, do I have the right foods if somebody who's vegan comes on? Do I have the right food if somebody who's lactose intolerant comes on? Do I have, are they going to be able to source this at the next stop or port? Have they called ahead? It just opens up like a myriad of questions. Whereas if the chef sent you a simple report saying, we can cater to vegan, lactose intolerant, and I don't know, nut allergies. I'm just making this up, but
Sure.
and at the next stop, I've already called ahead. They have all the supplies, but we won't be able to take on anybody with like who has a lactose allergy because at that stop, they don't have that. So you have to problem solve for that specific problem, and not like the whole, ask yourself a whole bunch of questions.
One of the biggest things that I see, and we run into this all the time, is that no, regardless of size of company, whether as big as a Pfizer size company or they're a small startup company, one of the things that they can't not think about is security and patient safety. Everything they do is meant around making sure that the data that they're going to submit to the regulatory authorities recognizes that nobody changed the data. They're not fudging the data, all that kind of stuff, and the data integrity is sound. So the issue around patient safety and making sure that the drug is going to be safe for that patient is so important. Tell me about some of the things that you work with, maybe with the CROs or with others, to think about some of the issues that they have to do, and maybe not just safety, but maybe there's other issues that you work with the CROs to make sure they're getting the best out of those CROs.
Yeah, that's a great question because it is the most important thing right now. Well, I mean, the FDA will approve a drug based on benefit risks, right? So the benefits have to outweigh the risks, and the risks are the side effects and the safety. So they are always looking at that balance. And we're always concerned that the drug we're developing has more efficacy and more benefits to a patient than causing more risks. So, having kind of explained that, the safety part, you know, if you think about it, the sponsor or small biotech has spent 5, 10 years developing this drug. They know all the studies that have been done, like in vitro, which is in like test tubes and lab environments, or in vivo in animals, different species of animals. We have to do two species when we're developing a drug. They have all that information. They know based on that information and based on what could happen in the safety. And it's they have to translate all of that knowledge to the CRO in a very succinct way. So because the CRO doesn't have time or the bandwidth or maybe even the capacity to understand all that could happen with this drug. And that's part of the pros and the cons because they're going to be super alert to observe anything that has to do with safety. But then they're also going to be advised that this is what you should look for because this is what we think could happen, you know. But again, it's that, what it's that translation of something you know super, super well as a sponsor and translating it to somebody who's an expert in monitoring and not necessarily safety. So it's being able to speak the language on both sides. And that's where, having spent time on both sides of the table, I kind of can put myself in the shoes of somebody from a CRO as well as in the shoes of somebody from a sponsor and help them kind of bridge the gaps, translate.
Well, let's talk about that because you have a special methodology that you use working with small biotechs. Tell us a little bit about your methodology, and I think it's important for people to understand that you've learned from many jobs, whether CRO, sponsor, all across the board of big companies, small companies. Tell us how your methodology helps these smaller companies.
Yeah, so I wanted to create something, like I said, that translates and helps them, but doesn't, um, you know, overburden them with cost and extra personnel. So I built the clinical momentum method. That's what I've called it, and it's a series of packages that sponsors can small biotechs can purchase to actually help them at the different stages. So, for example, I have a package that will help them select the right CRO, ask the right questions, create a document that really helps them find the right partner because it's all about fit for purpose, as you know, with your company. I'm sure that comes up a lot.
Absolutely.
And then I have also a gap assessment, which if a small biotech feels that something's not right, and usually these leaders of ClinOps are really smart people. They know their science, they know clinical operations. They can feel it. Like they have a gut feeling that this just isn't right. I offer like a 10-day assessment. Again, not to overburden them with costs, but to give them an outsider's point of view where I really do a root cause analysis on where's the information breakdown and how can we help the CRO get the information to the sponsor to make those go no go decisions. And then I have a 6-week version and a 6-month version, depending if the small biotech can't run the kind of processes I give them. I have the ability to step in for a period of time. Again, always for a fixed period of time because I want to teach them how to do this and leave them with a process and not, again, overburden them and just, bill them every month like most CROs do, because that would defeat the purpose of creating the momentum.
Now, does this all tie back to those original 5 questions that you start to ask, or tie those
Absolutely.
things back?
Yeah, because I try to whittle down. the 20-page report or the 40 metrics that the CRO has given them into 8 to 12 metrics that they can monitor easily. The outcome I want is to reduce their oversight time at the small CRO by like 10 hours, at the small biotech, sorry, by 10 hours. Because if they spend 40 hours overseeing, their partners, they don't have time to prepare for the board or, do internal meetings with their teams or, update the CEO, do their regular job, like continue developing other products. So, my goal is to really give them time back and give them like clarity on what is the most important thing to look at and how to get that information from the CRO.
Great. So that communication aspect of working with the CRO and being able to talk the CRO's language, that's what's really important in some of the conversations that you have with these small biotechs and how to deal with them. One of the
Yeah.
problems that I think you see, and we may have alluded to this earlier, is that people coming out of large pharma or large companies, they go to small ones, they have their preferred vendors that they've used for years and years and years. And those vendors may be really good dealing with a large global company, and they may not be that good with dealing with a small biotech that's startup that's trying to do something. So it's like, how do you convince somebody that you've met at a company that, hey, there's other options out there, or there might be something else that's worth looking at for your size company. When we go back to that fit for purpose conversation that we had.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because there is multiple studies that show that what we call a functional service provider model actually costs these small biotechs like 40% less than going with a full service large CRO. So there is data out there that people have looked at this. And often I will just show the value of having control on certain parts of your business. So obviously, if you give everything to one company, you are entirely dependent upon them. And it's really hard to get what you need from that for a small biotech. Whereas if you decide, okay, I need, this a specialized data management system for my, gene editing or my CRISPR technology, I'm going to get like a separate data management or a separate, TMF system because it is really important. The FDA has never seen this technology. I want to make sure that I know what documents are in the the trial master file and that somebody who's managing it is just an expert in TMF. So, we look at what is the most important regulatory things they need to have. And then I obviously give them the choice of, I recommend a model and give them the choice of, going with different models. But there is a lot of evidence out there right now supporting that possibly piecing out what is most important to you is actually a more economical way to go. And we know that right now the investment in small biotechs is not at the levels it's been in the past. So
That's
any
part of our
dollar
job.
they can save.
That's part of our job, yours and mine. Both we're always looking to say, how can we have you guys focus in on your science and not worry about spending extra money on things you don't need to. So I think from a business perspective, I think coming to the table with these smaller companies and being able to really help them to understand that is big. And I think that what you're doing is fantastic.
Oh,
We're coming up
thanks.
on time, so I'd love to hear your closing remarks and what you think about, where you are and where you're going and where the industry is going in general.
Yeah, so I think it's I think like I mentioned, the industry right now is at an inflection point. Money is starting to come back in, which is fantastic. People are investing in research again. Last year was really tough. I think there is we're going to have to change how we do things and really be more mindful of fit for purpose for those small biotechs because let's be real, 63% of all innovations come out of these small biotechs. So my hope is that, you know, we will be able to find solutions and processes that really fit this type of company, doesn't overburden them, and doesn't use like 75% of their full company expenditure on, one trial.
Right.
So that's my hope.
Awesome. I want to thank you very much, Natalie. This has been fantastic. Great conversation. And I want to thank everybody that's listening to this. This has been the Driving the Business of Science podcast. And today we had Natalie on talking about the CRO sponsor interaction for particularly for small biotech. And I think it was some great knowledge there. And I'd encourage everybody to check up on Natalie. You're in LinkedIn, Natalie, and
I am. The
a lot.
company is called OncoSpire Consultants. So, and I'm here to serve small biotechs. So anybody who calls me, I'm happy to just chat through things with them.
Sounds great. Awesome. I'll actually introduce you to somebody else that we had on earlier, one of our earlier podcasts, the GLSA network. I think you'd be perfect for the GLSA network, as well as talking to a buddy of mine, KO, who runs Clin.ai. I think that you and he and KO would get along well. So
Great.
make that happen with us. And that's part of
Thank
what we
you.
do here is try to connect people. So thanks to everybody for listening. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.